Welcome, Kritee Kanko. And thank you for being the first guest ever on the Justice Inside Out podcast. So I'd just like to invite you to introduce yourself in whichever way you wish, what work it is you do, what you feel passionate about, anything else that you feel is relevant for this conversation we'll be having.
Yeah, thank you. Um, I my work is within my four lineages, and I want to, acknowledge my ancestors before I speak of my work because my work exists in the context of those lineages. My family lineage is a lineage of change makers, activist for justice in India, justice and health in India. My grandpa, Mulchand Jain, was a Gandhian freedom fighter who stayed in jail for 3.5 years total in his lifetime, opposing British colonialism and then corruption within Indian systems. And just a very remarkable being. He was called Gandhi of Haryana. And my father, mother, they both worked, and my mother is still working for, health and justice, healing and justice. My mother is a psychologist. My second lineage is as a climate scientist, and I could speak for hours just of how many wise and radical scientists that I have learned from. My third strand of work is within what is called Zen Buddhism. It's the form of Buddhism that traveled from India to China to Japan and then reached Western shores. And the fourth one, they are all relevant to our conversation today. The fourth lineage is the lineage of community grief and rage ceremonies, which were just such a crucial part of how human beings managed their relationship with human and more than human world, and something we have left far behind. So what I do today is at the intersection of these four lineages, sometimes very purely helping, you know, getting together with people. I love to hold people's hands with their permission and ask them, how are they truly doing?
Hmm.
Know? And then soon, if you are in a group, those conversations can go towards people actively talking about their deepest, uh, deep, most deeply held, sometimes closeted grief and rage.
Hmm.
And I think that work creates a gateway for either deepening the spiritual practice, right? To reach a mind of non separation, or towards how do we act to bring justice in the world, right? Like for me, trauma work, grief and rage work is a portal that is necessary both for deepening spiritual work and for action in the outer political, social spheres of life. Um, And the scientific lineage, in some ways, that's what I have trained the most in. But sometimes science is so embedded, just like law. Fatima, I know you study law. Science is so embedded in mainstream extractive capitalist structures that uh, um, it doesn't excite me too much, although I so appreciate what I have learned about climate crisis from being a scientist.
I know that you're very uh, moved by the social injustices that you see. How did that weave into this journey?
Yeah. So I made a shift for a while. My spiritual journey of doing meditation retreats. I would do 5 week long retreats in one year. It was really intense in first 10 years of my meditation practice. I was so hooked. And that was happening at the same time I was finishing my PhD doctoral program. And I was learning about um, um, how fucked up human beings are, basically, right? How much we have destroyed the body of the very earth, Mother Earth, that supports us. But my spiritual work wasn't talking to my and work as an environmental climate scientist, right? They were like parallel train tracks that are happening simultaneously to me, but it was like in daytime I'm doing my science work and evenings and mornings I'm meditating, but there isn't an interaction between them. Yeah. When I sort of quote unquote finished my training, and the training, spiritual training, never gets over, but I finished my training enough that my teacher said, Kriti, go, you can go teach by yourself, be an independent teacher. And I came to from New Jersey, east coast of United States, when I came to Colorado, which is land of Rapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne peoples. I I thought, what kind of spiritual community do I want to start? Do I want to be part of creating? And when I was asking those questions, I met this amazing human being called Joanna Macy. And in one of these gatherings where she facilitates grief and rage work, um, she just fell down on the floor purposely, and she sobbed and cried and mourned. And she spoke about, I'm tearing up as I speak, because in that moment she spoke of grief of a river. And I don't remember her exact words, but it was something like, what have my children done to my body? How can my human children pollute me and turn away? Right, there was this genuine archetypal pain flowing from her. It's like Mother River, the waters are saying, what have my children done? That moment, looking back, was for me a coming together of spirituality and my work as an environmental scientist, right? So that's one thread. Now, the question of when did social justice come into all of this? After this work, initial work, trying to excite Buddhists in this very white and privileged city of Colorado, right? Uh, I don't know if you know anything about Boulder. Maybe many of your listeners might not have heard of Boulder. It's a city with highest number of PhDs in the country, one of the highest. It's like, and rich folks. It has very little racial diversity overall, but it's just a hub where people like me and my husband, who's also a climate scientist, naturally get attracted to, right? It's like our scientist peers are here, and it's like got hundreds of Buddhist meditation groups. So here I am with my internal resolve, love to help people with environmental crisis, to help people see the truth of how severe climate crisis is. And I can't seem to go too far. And I was like, what's wrong with this? Why aren't these well-meaning Buddhists who talk about compassion all the time, right? Why aren't we getting activated more deeply, more fully? Why aren't we ready for civil disobedience? In United States, we use the word nonviolent direct action, NVDA. It's like, why aren't we doing mass mobilization? Right? I would organize these actions, but not enough people would show up, or they would show up very inconsistently. That led me to two things. One, further digging into why people aren't acting. And I got two things there. One is that people who are privileged, yeah, people who are comfortable in their current lifestyle don't always want to disturb the status quo, right? So part of that was about racial diversity of who I was trying to approach. And the second is, no matter who I am talking to, um, there are just layers and layers of trauma that need to be addressed, layers and layers of stress that need to be addressed before you expect people to take actions, right? These people come to Buddhism for healing. They don't come to Buddhism to get activated as social justice or climate justice activists. So they are trying to calm down their nervous systems as opposed to access their inner rage. It's like, how the hell is this happening? Right? How on earth are we allowing genocide in Palestine, Sudan, or Congo to continue? So, am I making sense?
Yes.
When I was trying to activate primarily white, rich, relatively comfortable Buddhist in US, I didn't go too far.
Mm.
And I started saying people who have less in material terms, sometimes it's easier to tell them to, go on the street. They are not people in this hyper individualistic capitalist racist system that we are in.
Mm.
And over time, I realized I began my own study, right, of how deeply, not just intertwined, but similar climate justice is to racial justice, to study of what colonialism and genocides have done to us, right? The inseparability of different aspects of what I now call polycrisis, right? When I started this journey, I was a Buddhist climate scientist wanting to activate people. But who I am now is someone who's looking at these. We have multiple names for this hydra, but it is one hydra. You know that mythological creature, hydra?
No, I don't.
Hydra,
Yeah.
Hydra, hydra. It's a mythological creature. Sometimes it has 7 limbs, sometimes it has 8 limbs. It's like a monsters that in mythology, the protagonist, the hero of the story, is cutting one limb of the hydra and the another limb comes and attacks.
Yes.
So it's like colonialism, climate crisis, income inequality, water crisis, salt crisis. They can look like different things, but they originate from same monster, same hydra.
What is that monster? What is the origin? Yeah.
The mind of separation.
Right. Yeah.
The mind of separation, or in modern terms, I would say mind, heart that is so traumatized that it feels like it needs to accumulate things for what it thinks is me, I. Hyper individualism, capitalism are born out of and fueled by this sense that I am separate and I need to accumulate something for myself, and it is okay if it means I snatch it from you, right? And so, but it has become, the manifestations of these monsters have become multi-layered now. And so it's a polycrisis. If you look at it from lens of economy, it looks like income inequality. Look at it from lens of ecological crisis, it looks like water pollution, soil pollution, toxicity in rivers and in our air, and so on, right? It looks like refugee crisis, but where did refugee crisis come from? You colonized these places for centuries and you took away their resources and you left people impoverished, and you divided and ruled. So then you are left with refugee. On top of it, you have climate crisis. So what I'm saying is that I underwent a process of seeing that inseparability myself. I didn't come to United States, come into this life understanding this inseparability early on. It was a journey, and it is a journey I would invite all your podcast listeners to go deeper and deeper into. It's endless journey, right? It is such a crucial journey because the mainstream environmental movement ends up trying to deal with just one leg of this monster, which is climate crisis. And what I found in my 12 years of working in the mainstream environmental movement is that in trying to take care of one leg of the monster, sometimes you not only neglect the other legs, you make those issues worse, right? So, unless you see the totality, unless you're thinking at systems level, you're gonna be rearranging chairs on the deck of Titanic, right? Or whatever analogy works for you. The ability to see things at systems level is missing so badly in all of academia, right? In all of the ways our policy nerds and scientists overall are working. So I am still on that journey, and the place I'll end this share is that the the people who give me most hope, people who have demonstrated for centuries that systems level analysis of a problem is possible are, guess what?
Indigenous peoples.
Em- Empowered indigenous peoples, where they have access to their lands, their language, their culture. They have power to make their decisions, where they have not been impoverished to a level where they are dealing with addiction, malnutrition, water pollution, soil pollution, and barely surviving, right? A lot of indigenous people are not empowered. The colonization has taken away their power. But when they are empowered, where there are clues of empowered communities, they are looking at river flow, wind flow, fire issues, plant issues, animal issue, bird issues all together, right? They are systems level experts of their local ecosystems. And on the other hand, someone like me gets degrees from fancy universities around, India, US, so hyper specialized in one subject that it takes years to learn language of someone who doesn't understand soil, right? Like I'm a soil expert, and to talk to water experts, I need to talk to one water expert or air quality expert, I need 10 formal conferences and spend, thousands of pounds or dollars. You see what I'm saying? Like, and even then, I'm not an expert on my local ecosystem.
I feel like this point is just so crucial. So I'm just going to ask you to bear with me. And if you were to explain the interconnected nature of all these crises that you call the polycrisis to somebody who'd never thought about this before, that's never really approached these questions, could you kind of in a very simple way that's relatable or understandable explain it? And maybe also if you could weave in, like, what is this separation thing? What are you talking about when you say that we feel separate? And I know you already touched on this, but I just feel like this is kind of key to the conversation we're having.
So let's first define polycrisis. It's not a phrase that I came up with. Europeans came up with this to describe multiple simultaneously existing crises that take away humanity's chance of survival, right? That's the latest definition, right? So, if you look at just the European context, a European country might say, oh, we have our internal financial issues. Then we have so many refugees coming from all over the world. and we have local environmental crises, inflation, geopolitical conflict with, let's say Russia. These are the multiple crises that are facing us. And so this is the polycrisis EU countries need to face. Okay. This definition is very Eurocentric, and what people like me and others, we said, listen, income inequality, colonization are also part of this polycrisis, right? The religious violence, the caste-based violence, racism-based violence, centuries of slavery, all of those are either ongoing problems or are at the root of where we are globally. So that's polycrisis. Let's go to your second question, because that question might throw light on inseparability of issues, how they appear in the outer political world. Going back to indigenous worldview, indigenous languages, my understanding is that they don't have nouns, they have verbs. Have you heard that before? So there isn't Fatima and Kritee talking to each other. Conversation is happening. Communion is happening. Exchange is happening, right? Instead of two nouns, Kritee and Fatima, eye gazing is happening. Smiling is happening. Somehow, because there is this two physical bodies, the Western mind, the modern mind, not just of Westerners, but people in Asia, Africa, Latin America too, it's become too rigid around this notion that there is Kritee and there is Fatima, and Kritee needs to take care of her interests. So the focus went away from smiling, eye gazing, being together, to Kritee watching out for her interests and Fatima watching out for her interests. Am I using right pronouns for you, Fatima?
Yes.
Yes. So from all the Eastern religions, the non-dual, this what are called non-dual religions of the world, there isn't a separation between God and here are us human beings. We have the God consciousness in us, right? We have the Kali consciousness in us, or Buddha consciousness in us. There isn't a duality. Duality means things can be broken up into two parts, or they are already two. They were always two. So from Eastern religion point of view, Buddhism is one such religion, Hinduism is one such religion, and most indigenous religious spiritualities have say we are all made of similar stardust, right? Not only we are made of similar stardust, but we come into existence together, and that's a hard one to unpack. It's like saying I wouldn't exist if you weren't there. It's like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle for people who've studied physics, that observer and observed come into being together. And that language is a little nebulous, so let me go simpler, try to go a little simpler. Maybe one simple example is of ocean. When we take a swim or a boat ride in a water body, we can get enamored. I actually get enamored by the waves that form on the surface of water body, or the individual bubbles. And you can take those individual bubbles or waves too seriously, but in the end, they are part of the vast ocean. They are one. So similarly, fighting over Fatima or Kritee is ridiculous. Like when Fatima and Kritee start taking that temporary wave-like structure too seriously, then I want to hoard wealth. I want to hoard properties, land, sources for my continued existence, even though I'm going to even physically die in 60, 70 years. So that sense that I am Kriti can make me very greedy instead of the mindset, which is, let's call it empowered indigenous mindset, that I thrive when everyone thrives. I thrive not only when my human community thrives, but when Oyster Nation thrives, Elephant Nation thrives, Stone People thrive, River thrives, Mountain thrives. I want to then, if I'm in the mind of separation, then I am always looking out for how do I have more clothes, better looking clothes, so I can have partnerships with more handsome partners, more money, bigger house, more comfort when heat or cold are around. It's just me, 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 me. As opposed to going into the oceanic mind and saying, I need to take care of the whole ocean because that's me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the mind of separation then leads to all of these different things. At the political social level, the harm that arose from mind of separation among European colonizers is a root cause of where we are today. That colonization first led to use of human bodies. Some of your ancestors may be being brutalized as slaves. Right? I use that word and my body shivers. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. That and then when human slavery became impossible for the colonizers to continue with, we raped earth and we took out coal and oil and gas, and we are using uh, that body of earth as slaves, right? We moved. The greed was similar, but instead of using human bodies, we exploited more than human body of that ocean, and now it's a combination, right? That is still continuing. Low wage workers in Asia, Africa, everywhere are making useless trinkets to serve no one, polluting the environment all at the same time because some people get to make billions, right? So same thing, similar greed is causing so many issues. It's causing income inequality. It's causing extraction of resources to make plastic toys that you use once and then throw away in oceans. And then our whales and, you know, beautiful, charismatic um, sea life are ingesting it and getting killed.
I think this next question is maybe going to lead us to the topic of grief and the collective trauma that you and I have spoken of. One might ask, like, how come people don't feel this? Like, how come you can watch what is happening to the earth and you don't really feel any connection to it, or it doesn't sadden you? And I'm not saying this to point any fingers or to saying that someone is right or wrong. But I'm curious to ask, why people are so, let's say, numbed out when it comes to these questions.
I think you and some of your listeners have heard of Joanna Macy, Frances Weller, or Melodomas, Sobanfu Some. All of these people, these elders that I have learned from, are a lot of trauma therapists, right, across the world. They are very clear that numbness this apparent apathy. Like, how could you see this and not feel a searing, seething pain in your heart? This numbness is a trauma response, right? When something harsh happens to a child, right? And these patterns start forming in childhood. Um, if the child, young person, teenager, doesn't have ways to grieve or rage, right, about it, when that stress happens, people get into either fight response, flee, right, freeze. There's a fourth one, which I talk about, is fawning, appeasing. It's similar to freezing. So so when an animal falls from a tree, uh, they shake it out. Okay, they're not conscious of who's looking, who's, and in families in India, a kid falls, we let the kid cry. You'll make sounds, you'll release that stress right then and there. Okay, what has happened in our modern culture is sometimes those loving adults are missing who will show you how to release that stress, right? Or we are so domesticated that we have to be proper ladies. You don't cry and grieve, and we've domesticated. That wildness that helped us release our trauma is not there. So when it is not there, then we develop these habits of either fighting everything which is said. Fighting is not bad in itself, but fighting becomes a trauma response, constantly fighting, constantly being aggressive, constantly running away from a situation, or constantly freezing. That's something stressful. Photograph of a giant blue whale dying or dead. These are just amazing creatures that should give a lot of pain and impulse for action, but instead I freeze. So from my perspective, which is shared by many of my teachers, ancestors, colleagues, is numbness is a trauma response, and to begin to enliven ourselves, right? Places where we feel safe and we can access our emotions again and grieve what we couldn't grieve when we were younger or when our ancestors were alive. Some of the pain is intergenerational. Kritee and Fatima aren't just carrying their own physical life's trauma. Our genes literally store the trauma of our ancestors, right? There is epigenetic coding of trauma. So, unless I can begin to access those emotions again and release them, I don't get to come alive. And it isn't just with respect to ecological pain or pain around injustices, social injustices. When we suppress or numb out on pain, we also suppress and numb out joy, creativity, courage.
And so, would you say that it's a prerequisite to getting involved, getting engaged, that you need to go on this personal healing journey? Because I don't know. I feel like there's been a lot of debate about that in the spiritual community. People that are saying, like, oh, but everybody should tend to themselves and their own healing. Whereas I'm just curious, is it possible that these things can happen simultaneously, or
Uh,
you
the
get my question?
Yep, I get your question. I think they need to happen simultaneously. The the intensity of crises that we are facing is so much that we don't have luxury. In fact, we can make some things worse if we just focus on individual level trauma healing. That sometimes can take decades, right? If done in a very individualistic way, the way Western world is approaching healing. Um, be, there is a way in which healing can be approached where it's like buy these plans and self-help books or blah blah blah, and it's like, oh, then you're gonna heal and then you're gonna care about others, right?
Right.
That we do not have time to do that. The challenge is, how do you do this in real time, right? How do you do, like, I have worked with people, I know friends, community members who have gone and put their bodies on the line to oppose a pipeline, new pipeline from being constructed, right? When you do something like this, you face police. Police is coming to arrest you, and you are standing there in solidarity with Indigenous people who have called you there to support them in opposing this pipeline. But then seeing police and law enforcement officers use violence against activists will bring up all the old trauma.
Right.
There is some preparation that can be done for that, taking care of that trauma before that event, but some needs to happen in real time. And this is where community comes in. I feel like we do not have time for one, but community coming together before taking actions, during actions, after actions, to release the grief and rage and fear, naming our confusions. That is the model I believe in, right? Uh, I do not believe that meditation in itself or spiritual work in itself will take care of these things, because even spiritual work can be done in a hyper individualized way. It's like each of us on our own do navel gazing, and then in 10 years you will be ready for actions. That doesn't happen. I know hundreds of people who've been meditating for decades and they've never been ready for taking care of someone else's grief. You know, justice in the end is saying, you and I are part of the ocean, we are ocean, and your well-being matters to me as much as my own physical body's well-being. That's justice, right? And I don't get there by individual level healing. Community coming together is so crucial, and that's why grief and rage work that I put my energy in is always communal, always communal. There is just so many gifts of grieving and raging together. Because when you see someone else releasing their grief and rage and going, you know, shaking, rocking, swaying, singing, drumming, then your body somatically gets into that mode. And then someone else speaks their grief, and your grief is mirrored in that. Then you feel seen. You don't need one on one psychotherapy lessons, you know? Um, is that making sense?
Yeah, and I would just be so curious to hear more about these the grief and rage spaces that you hold. Like what happens there? What is it you do?
There are many ways to do this, many ways to do this, but the primary ingredients are that you gather. These need to be done with a lot of care, with someone who has done a lot of their own grief and rage work, right? So the prerequisite is that you have facilitators who are not afraid of any kind of grief and rage. Okay. And that takes a lot of inner work. Takes a lot of inner work to say, no matter what's going to come out of your mouth, I am here grounded for you. You need at least a few people like that. And when you do these ceremonies, then what actually happens is that, uh, depending on the lineage of these ceremonies, I call them grief and rage ceremonies, you create containers for trust building and grounding first, because you don't get into talking about the most difficult stories of your life or your ancestors' life or your community's country's life without developing trust. So you do put a lot of emphasis on meditating together, drumming, singing, chanting, things that tell you that you are okay in this moment, right? And then you call in ancestors, you call in elements, and then you create agreements on how people are going to share their grief. Some communities, some lineages focus on just somatic expression. They don't focus on actual storytelling. It's like there is loud drumming and singing happening in the background, and you go and wail, scream, moan, keen, whatever you want to do to let out the stuck grief and rage in your body. And the background is just continuing. They are singing, chanting, drumming, even doing ecstatic dancing in the background. So you create elaborate altars where you can go and start your own personal screaming, wailing. There are other tradition where somatic expression might or might not be there, but you do gentle storytelling. You put symbols of grief and rage in a circle. People are sitting in a circle. One by one, people come into the center. They are holding the object that represents their grief or rage or fear. And they hold that object, and they might share stories of their childhood, their grandmothers, whatever. And they might sob silently, and others are sobbing with them. There are many ways to organize this. What matters is ability of that container to hold deepest, darkest truths of human life. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Emailed you about that. I'd like to ask each guest, and then we can wrap it up if it's okay with you. If you need to um, leave now, that's also fine.
No, let's see. What does justice feel like? There is a way in which you give someone punishment for what they have done, and that is called justice in our mainstream society, right? Someone killed someone, raped someone, colonized someone, and you give them imprison them for years or decades. What I have been leaning into is the Gandhian and Kingian Martin Luther King version of justice, which is like saying when something harsh happens between, let's say, Fatima and Kritee, that Fatima and Kritee can come together and talk about the history of their traumas that brought them to the current conflict, and they can grieve. They can both grieve. How did we end up here? And then they can work together for collective justice. Like that's what justice feels like to me. And that feels like a long road. You say, oh, this person is not even ready to accept that this was a conflict. They are not even ready to accept that colonization is real. How can there be justice? But it does happen. South Africa, it was very imperfect. It had a lot of issues, but South Africa had truth and reconciliation circles. And they happen between families of those who were murdered and the murderer. This happens between rapist and the person who was raped. There are examples of it. But that's the full restorative justice, right? And it involves a lot of truth telling and understanding of each other's trauma. And it's very tricky, right? The person who was raped or murdered or colonized needs to feel very safe and held internally to be able to hear the so-called oppressor's trauma. How did the oppressor become an oppressor? Oppressor isn't born as an oppressor. Oppressors were born because of mind of separation. How did their mind of separation get watered? Right? That's a huge challenge. And we can start there.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kritee. It's just been lovely speaking with you and listening to your heart just speak out. I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing. So, and thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I realize I gave long answers. I forgot sense of time myself. So hopefully
Yes.
extract some meaningful
Oh,
snippets.
no doubt. Yes, absolutely. So, Thank you so much. I feel like it's been just very valuable for me just to hear you speak.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Take
you
care,
for
Kritee. Bye.